All right, I've got my Bible here, and I'm ready to read you absolutely every book of the Bible that was written by someone who had met Jesus. We can go ahead and skip the Hebrew Bible since Jesus wasn't alive when that was written, and go straight to the New Testament. You ready? Not a single word.
Now, this is an argument that critical scholarship often likes to spew out about the New Testament, specifically the Gospels. Now, I would argue that this is an agenda-based narrative and is not actually rooted in the data we have about how the Gospels came about. So here's a few things to consider. All of the earliest sources, all of the early 1st and 2nd century church fathers affirm that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Papias, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement, Origen, Tertullian. You have to reject everything that they say about the Gospels. They're our earliest sources, and they all attribute the Gospels to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Another thing to consider, every surviving manuscript of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that have titles are all attributed to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There isn't a Gospel of Matthew out there that's accidentally attributed to Thomas, or a Gospel of John that's actually attributed to Luke, or anything like that. So if they were actually anonymous, why is there no confusion on who wrote what? That would be something you would expect to see if they didn't know who actually wrote them. And the last few things I'll say are attributed to Richard Bauckham. He's a scholar who wrote this book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. This mug is thick, and he's got a lot of evidence to support why the Gospels are actually eyewitness accounts. Bauckham argues that in the ancient world, naming a person in an account was a way to attribute them as a source of an eyewitness, and we see this all throughout the Gospels, named individuals. For Mark and John, he argues a literary device called inclusio, and the literary device is used as a bookend that the key eyewitness is mentioned at the very beginning of the book and the very end. So in Mark, who's attributed to Peter's account, Peter is the first disciple mentioned, and at the end, he's the last disciple mentioned. And in John, the same way. John is the first disciple mentioned, and then he's mentioned again as the last person in the book of John. The last thing he mentions that he goes into extensive detail about is just Palestinian names in the 1st century and how these authors got them right, marking them as people who were there in that time and place. Now, I just gave you the TikTok version of a 600-page scholarly work. Bauckham clearly shows an incredible amount of data that the Gospels are indeed eyewitness accounts.